Imagine this: a busy airport terminal. Travelers from all walks of life shuffle through the gates, weighed down by their bags, their plans, and their weariness. Lines wind around every corner, people mumbling in excitement or restlessness, each passenger with a story and a destination. Among them, a young black girl stands alone, quietly absorbing her surroundings. She's poised, calm, carrying herself with an air of quiet confidence that seems almost surprising for someone so young. With a ticket in hand, she steps forward, approaching the gate for first class. But as she does, someone else is watching her with a different kind of attention. She doesn't know it yet, but her very presence in this section of the airport has stirred feelings in one particular member of the flight crew, an experienced flight attendant, who's seen thousands of passengers board. This attendant has been with the airline for years, through every delay, every rule change, every shift in protocol. She's worn the uniform proudly, considering herself a guardian of the traditions and unspoken standards she believes should define her profession. Yet, under that seasoned exterior, something has been growing: a bitterness, a sense of frustration toward the changes she's witnessed. Her vision of how things should be has been challenged more than once, and each time, it's chipped away at her sense of pride in her work. Over time, this frustration has twisted into resentment. New faces, new voices, new types of passengers have filled the cabins and shifted the culture of her world, and she resents the fact that the airline doesn't look, sound, or operate as it once did. As the girl walks down the aisle and takes her seat in first class, the flight attendant takes note of her in an instant, her gaze lingering a bit longer than necessary. There's something about seeing this girl in first class that rubs her the wrong way, almost like it's disrupting some unspoken rule she holds in her mind. A subtle irritation, a sense that something is out of place, takes root. It's a feeling she can't quite ignore, like an itch that only grows with each second. The flight attendant carries on with her tasks, yet her thoughts drift back to that young girl, seated in the spot she believes should be reserved for a certain type of passenger, someone she considers more fitting for the seat, more in line with what she's always expected to see. Minutes pass, and boarding continues. The aisle fills with passengers, some stressed, some distracted, others simply looking for their seats. Amid this bustle, the flight attendant watches each passenger, performing her role with a smile that never quite reaches her eyes. But every so often, her gaze shifts back to that young girl in first class, her thoughts clouded by a belief she wouldn't openly admit yet can't deny feeling. To her, this girl doesn't belong in first class, not in the way she's come to define belonging over the years. The girl, however, sits quietly, looking out the window, aware of the people moving around her but untouched by the unspoken judgments cast her way. She's traveled before, she's used to curious stares, to assumptions she's learned to brush off without a second thought. But even in her calmness, she feels that almost imperceptible shift in energy, the weight of a gaze she can't quite place. For now, she chooses to ignore it, focused on the journey ahead, her excitement bubbling just below the surface. Little does she know that the tension around her isn't going to fade, it's only just begun. The flight attendant, hardened by years of experience, tries to focus on her duties, but her mind can't quite escape a certain nagging feeling. Her career has spanned decades. She remembers when things felt simpler, more orderly, or at least more in line with the expectations she grew up with. It frustrates her to see how much things have changed, how much has been redefined, and in her eyes, watered down. In her early days, first class was a sanctuary, a place with its own unspoken code, a space reserved for a certain kind of passenger. And now, every time she boards a plane, it feels like that code has been erased. Her resentment runs deeper than she's willing to admit to anyone, perhaps even to herself. She tells herself it's just nostalgia for a better time, a more respectable era. But in truth, it's more than that. She feels a bitterness toward the new diversity initiatives, the pressure to be more inclusive, the flood of new faces and voices in every aisle. She resents having to accommodate what she considers the modern way of doing things, where anyone can be anywhere, without regard for the old rules that made her world feel secure and predictable. And so, when she sees this young black girl sitting in first class, alone and seemingly so comfortable, something inside her stirs. An uneasy feeling, a mix of disbelief and indignation rises up. She can't quite grasp it, but it gnaws at her. She catches herself thinking, almost instinctively, that this girl simply doesn't belong here. Her thoughts drift to silent questions. How did she get this seat? Why is she alone? Did she somehow sneak in? Her mind races with assumptions she knows she shouldn't have, rationalizations that don't fully add up. But she can't help it. She has an image in her mind of what first class should look like, of who belongs in these premium seats, and this girl doesn't fit it. and as much as she tries to shake it off, she finds herself circling back to that uneasy feeling. She convinces herself she's just being cautious, that she's just upholding the standards she's always known. This tension is more than just discomfort. It's rooted in something deeper, something she might not ever say out loud. Yet, she feels it, clear as day. A sense of encroachment, as if this girl's presence here is a kind of challenge to the way things should be. It's a sentiment she tries to justify as a matter of professional standards, but deep down, she knows there's more to it than that. It's something personal, something she can't fully explain but feels justified in holding on to. Her glances in the girl's direction grow more frequent, her demeanor tightening each time. She tries to distract herself with tasks checking boarding passes, managing luggage space, but her thoughts keep drifting back, each glance intensifying her unease. As passengers settle into their seats and prepare for takeoff, the flight attendant stands near the front of the cabin, her gaze fixed on the girl with a look that's colder than it should be. She's convinced herself that it's justifiable, her silent suspicions, her growing resentment. After all, in her mind, this girl doesn't fit the mold of the first-class passenger she's always expected to see. And so, the seeds of her judgment take root, shaped by years of silent biases and reinforced by a world she feels has shifted beneath her feet. As the passengers settle in, the flight attendant's attention keeps drifting back to the young girl in first class. The nagging feeling hasn't left her, it has only grown stronger, echoing as a quiet indignation she can't ignore. She decides it's time to confirm what she suspected all along. Slowly, with a look of professional detachment masking her resentment, she steps over to the girl's seat. With a practiced but frosty tone, she addresses the young girl. "Excuse me," she says, her voice just sharp enough to command attention. "May I see your ticket, please?" To anyone else, it might sound like a routine request, just a formality. But there's something in her tone, a hint of condescension, an almost imperceptible edge that makes the question feel like a judgment, not a simple inquiry. The young girl looks up, momentarily taken aback. She's been through airport routines before, and she knows the usual protocols, but there's something in the woman's demeanor that feels off. Nevertheless, she meets the flight attendant's gaze with quiet dignity. Her expression is calm, respectful, with just a flicker of confusion in her eyes. Silently, she reaches into her bag, pulling out the ticket, and hands it over with a polite smile. The attendant takes it, barely glancing at the girl. Her eyes scan the ticket with meticulous scrutiny, as if she's expecting to find something amiss, some error or oversight. The seconds drag on, and a faint tension fills the space around them, visible to anyone watching. Finally, she hands the ticket back, her expression still unreadable but tinted with an air of doubt. The confirmation on the ticket should settle any questions, but it doesn't. The girl takes her ticket, her smile a little smaller now, and carefully places it back into her bag. There's no question in her mind that she's done everything right, that she's where she belongs. But still, she can't shake a feeling of unease. She wonders silently what she could have done wrong to merit this level of scrutiny. The flight attendant, though, is still caught in her assumptions. She's not fully convinced, as if the young girl's calm, confident compliance somehow only amplifies her quiet offense. To her, the girl's composure feels misplaced, almost defiant. As she walks back to her post, she can't help but glance back once more, the seeds of suspicion still lingering, unable to shake the notion that somehow this young passenger doesn't quite fit into her world. The flight attendant watches the world passing her by, her thoughts wandering back through her own story, a journey she rarely shares, but one that has shaped her view of the world, a world she barely recognizes anymore. She was raised in a small town, one with rows of identical houses and an unspoken rule that everyone belonged to the same kind of family, had the same kind of upbringing. Her father was a man of strict beliefs. He often spoke of a world that ran on order, a system where everyone had their place, and stepping out of that place was not only frowned upon, but seen as unsettling. Her father's voice echoes in her mind, the lessons he drilled into her from a young age about people knowing where they belong. She had taken those lessons to heart, believing they were a natural truth about how society should function. But in the world she lives in now, things look nothing like her father's stories. The airline industry has changed over the years faster than she'd ever anticipated. Everywhere she looks, there's talk of diversity, of new, young faces being brought in and celebrated for their fresh ideas and vibrant perspectives. Every year, it seems there's one more training session, one more initiative promoting inclusion. She feels her place shrinking, the value of her experience being quietly overshadowed. And now, in a job she once felt proud of, she's caught between the past she cherished and the present that unsettles her. She watches younger staff members walking through the airport, handling passengers with a casualness that doesn't seem right. The ease with which they talk to people from all walks of life makes her feel like she's standing still, rooted in old rules in a world that's rushing forward without her. For every smile they share with the passengers, she feels her own authority slipping further away, her sense of control over her role dwindling. And now there's this young girl, sitting in first class, radiating a calm self-assurance that defies everything she was taught to believe. She clings to the ideal of a structured world, one where everyone knows and accepts their place. The sight of this girl unsettles her because, in her mind, it represents a fracture in the world she knew. She can't reconcile the image of the young, poised passenger with her notion of how things should be. It's as if the girl's presence is a defiance of all that was drilled into her, a reminder that the world is no longer arranged the way her father taught her to see it. The resentment burns quietly, simmering beneath the surface. She's trapped between the memory of the order she was raised with and the reality that is slipping beyond her control. In her mind, the girl isn't just a passenger. She is a symbol of everything that's changed, a challenge to her sense of order. And as the flight moves forward, the battle between the world she wants and the one she has only grows, inching her further down a path she can't seem to turn back from. As the plane settles into the steady hum of cruising altitude, the flight attendant's eyes find their mark again, always on the girl. She tries to focus on the tasks at hand, but her attention keeps drifting back to the young passenger. Each glance, brief but loaded, confirms the sense of discomfort building in her chest. The girl is still there, seated comfortably, quietly reading a book, as if she belongs exactly where she is. The flight attendant can't shake the feeling that something isn't right. It's as if the presence of the girl in first class is mocking her. Her mind, like an old, familiar record, plays the same refrain over and over. People need to stay in their place. This was how things were, how they should be. She thinks of her years of service, the weight of her experience, and how it used to command respect. How back then, there were clear lines, clear distinctions between people. But now, everything feels like it's being turned upside down. Her eyes keep darting back to the girl, and with each look, her conviction strengthens. The girl's poised demeanor, the ease with which she occupies this space, irks her more than she wants to admit. It's not the girl's fault. She knows this somewhere in the back of her mind, but she can't help the simmering resentment. Her thoughts twist and turn, desperately trying to justify the growing discomfort. She doesn't belong here, she convinces herself. She's not the type of person who should be sitting in first class. People like her don't belong in places like this. And then, like a floodgate opening, the reasoning spills over. The young girl doesn't just represent a person, she represents the whole of what's shifting in her world. A world that she feels is slipping through her fingers, leaving her behind in the dust of things that once felt right. With no more patience left for her thoughts, the flight attendant decides that this time she will act. There's no avoiding it. She walks over again, the same cold, authoritative air taking over her every step. She stands over the girl with the same question, the one that's been gnawing at her since takeoff. I need to see your ticket again. Her words are curt, clipped, and her tone carries an unmistakable edge. This isn't just a routine check anymore, it's a test, a challenge. She feels the sting of her own insecurity. But at the same time, there's a growing certainty within her. If she can just assert control over this situation, if she can just prove to herself that things haven't changed so much, maybe, just maybe, she can hold on to something she once knew. The young girl looks up, her calm expression unwavering. She hands over her ticket without a word, her gaze steady, but there's a flicker of discomfort in her eyes, just enough for the flight attendant to notice, a tiny crack in her composure. The girl doesn't say a thing. She simply waits, silently enduring the scrutiny. But as the attendant stares down at the ticket, she senses the girl's discomfort and interprets it as defiance. Her mind spins again. Why should she be uncomfortable? She has no reason to be. She's the one who's in the wrong place. The tension hangs thick between them. The attendant feels a rising heat in her chest, her actions now driven by the kind of certainty she's never questioned before. It's as if the world itself is aligning against the girl, and her need to assert control is more important than ever. But for the girl, it's a quiet resolve. She holds her ground, trying to make sense of the situation while keeping her dignity intact. The flight attendant returns the ticket, her hand shaking slightly, her internal battle raging. As she walks away, she casts one last look at the girl, the feeling of uncertainty washing over her. The tension is palpable, but it's not the kind of tension that can be cut with a single word. It's a tension born from something deeper, one she doesn't fully understand yet, but one she's unwilling to confront. The hum of the plane, once a reassuring constant, now seems like an oppressive buzz, growing louder in the flight attendant's ears. She's restless, on edge, each passing moment bringing more discomfort. Her mind, twisted in its thoughts, remains locked in a cycle of disbelief. But as she walks away from the young girl's seat, something shifts in the air. Anna, a fellow flight attendant, has been quietly observing from across the aisle. Anna, younger and more attuned to the evolving dynamics in the cabin, sees the interaction for what it truly is, an unequal power struggle. Her instincts, sharp from years of working together, immediately pick up on the underlying tension that the other flight attendant seems to be blind to. With a gentle but deliberate approach, Anna steps into the scene, her voice soft yet firm, her eyes locking with the more seasoned attendant. "Is everything all right here?" she asks, her tone carrying a note of concern that doesn't escape the attention of those around her. The biased flight attendant falters for a moment, caught off guard. The words she had prepared to justify her actions now seem hollow in Anna's gaze. Anna's presence, though not confrontational, is enough to make the older attendant question herself. She opens her mouth to speak. But Anna continues, "I think we're fine, but maybe it's time to let this one go." For a split second, the older attendant resists. It's a split second that feels like a lifetime to her. She wants to argue, to defend her decision, to validate the feeling that something was wrong. But the words don't come. Instead, there's a strange stillness, the weight of Anna's quiet challenge hanging heavy between them. The older flight attendant shifts uncomfortably, the sharpness in her chest slowly dulling, as she begins to realize the broader implications of her actions. As this exchange unfolds, the passengers, who have been quietly observing the scene, begin to stir. Their reactions are subtle at first sight, glances exchanged between seats, murmurs and hushed voices. But it doesn't take long for the unease to spread through the cabin, as one by one, they pick up on the injustice unfolding in the aisle. Among the onlookers, a man sitting a few rows behind the girl stands up. His expression is calm, but there's a quiet force in his voice when he speaks. "Excuse me," he says, addressing the older flight attendant, "but I think she's been through enough. Could you please leave her alone?" There's a pause, a moment where the cabin holds its collective breath. The older attendant's gaze flickers toward the man, and for the first time, she feels the eyes of the passengers, not just the young girl, on her. The words hang in the air, spoken not with hostility, but with a quiet demand for decency, for fairness. The man's words hit her like a weight she hadn't anticipated, and a wave of realization begins to seep through her, slow and heavy. The girl, sitting calmly, has not spoken a word, but her quiet presence, her unshaken composure, speaks volumes. She hasn't asked for this confrontation. She hasn't reacted with aggression, but with the same quiet dignity that has marked her from the moment she boarded the plane. She doesn't need to defend herself. Her mere existence in that seat is enough. The older flight attendant, though she doesn't say a word, feels the shift within her. Her sense of superiority begins to crumble, piece by piece. The collective eyes of the passengers are upon her now, and the weight of their judgment presses against her like a physical force. In this moment, she begins to question her own actions, her own motives, the righteousness she once held so firmly in place. For the first time, she feels the sting of her own behavior, an unspoken awareness that her biases, her prejudice, have been seen, not just by the girl, but by everyone in the cabin. The girl, with all her grace, has become the mirror reflecting the very flaws the attendant had refused to see in herself. As the older flight attendant steps back, her mind reels. She's been confronted, not by a single voice, but by the collective force of her passengers' quiet support for the young girl. In that brief, fleeting moment, the reality of her actions becomes painfully clear, and though no words are exchanged between her and the girl, an unspoken shift happens. The tension in the air does not fully dissipate, but there is a quiet recognition of the injustice that has taken place. The older flight attendant walks away, her footsteps slow, as if she's carrying something heavier than the weight of the service she's left behind. The girl remains in her seat, calm, collected, unbothered, as if the world around her has momentarily stopped spinning. As the plane settles into its cruising altitude, the flight attendant retreats to the galley, her footsteps heavy and uncertain. The comforting hum of the cabin fades into the distance, leaving her alone with her thoughts. The once familiar space, the galley, where she had always found a sense of control, now feels foreign and suffocating. Her hands, trembling slightly, rest on the counter. The once rhythmic motion of preparing drinks and checking supplies now feels mechanical. She's no longer fully present in the moment. Her mind is consumed by the recent exchange. The image of the young girl sitting so calmly, The passenger's quiet plea for the attendant to leave the girl alone, everything is playing over and over in her head like a broken record. The tension she had carried throughout the flight is suddenly replaced by something far more uncomfortable: doubt. What had she done? Why had she reacted the way she did? She finds herself grappling with a question she's avoided for years: how had she let her anger fester into something this corrosive? She tries to push it aside, but the feelings continue to rise, sharp and unrelenting. The anger, the resentment she had felt for so long, was it really about the girl? Or had it been about something deeper? Something that she had long buried beneath layers of professional decorum and rationalization. She stares out the small window at the endless expanse of clouds, the vastness of the world outside contrasting sharply with the small, confining space she occupies. Her reflection in the glass seems distant, like a version of herself she no longer recognizes. Her father's words echo in her mind, the same words that had once shaped her worldview. People need to know their place, he'd always said. That belief, ingrained deep in her, had guided her actions for so many years, giving her a sense of purpose, a structure to hold onto in a rapidly changing world. But now, standing here, away from the chaos of the passengers and the young girl, she wonders if it was all a lie. Had she been so blinded by her own sense of superiority that she couldn't see the harm she was causing? Had her frustration with the changes around her changes she could never quite accept manifested as a deep-seated prejudice against anyone who seemed to threaten the order she'd always known? She begins to feel the weight of it all: the missed opportunities for growth, the people she had silently judged, the way she had dismissed those who didn't fit into her narrow worldview. And most of all, the girl. She hadn't seen the girl as a person. She had seen her as a challenge, as something that didn't belong. And yet, the girl's calm, dignified presence had shaken her to her core. The realization begins to settle in, a painful recognition that she had allowed her own biases to cloud her judgment, to fuel an injustice that didn't need to happen. Tears sting at the back of her eyes, but she quickly blinks them away. She won't cry, not here, not now. Instead, she turns away from the window and takes a deep, steadying breath, her mind still racing. The guilt is overwhelming, but it's the guilt that forces her to confront what she had so long avoided: the depth of her own prejudice. She clenches her fists, as though to hold herself together, but it's clear that something inside her is breaking. Not in the way of a sudden, violent collapse, but in the quiet, subtle way that an idea or a worldview unravels when confronted with the truth. The girl had been right, and she had been wrong. It's a simple thought, but one that has the power to change everything. She had been so certain, so sure of herself, and yet she had misjudged the situation entirely. As the plane glides smoothly through the skies, the flight attendant takes a final, shaky breath, her reflection in the window now a distant reminder of who she was and who she might yet become. But the journey ahead, the one she must now take within herself, is just beginning. And it's a path she's not sure she's ready to walk, but one that she knows deep down she must. As the flight enters its final stretch, the atmosphere inside the cabin shifts. The tension that had once clouded the air now feels less oppressive, but it is far from gone. The flight attendant's footsteps are hesitant as she moves down the aisle, approaching the seat where the young girl still sits quiet, composed, yet visibly uneasy from the earlier confrontation. She stands before the girl for a moment, unable to fully meet her gaze, her hands trembling slightly. The girl, who had once seemed so out of place in the attendant's eyes, now appears grounded, an image of calmness that only serves to highlight the attendant's inner turmoil. I'm sorry, the flight attendant begins, her voice low and strained. There's a hesitation in her words, as though the weight of them is something she's never had to carry before. I didn't mean to make you feel uncomfortable. I was wrong in the way I treated you. The young girl looks up at her, her expression unreadable at first. The flight attendant wonders if the apology is enough, if it can even begin to undo the damage caused by her earlier actions. The girl doesn't immediately respond, but there's a shift in her posture, a subtle change that suggests she's taking in what's been said. The flight attendant stands there for a moment longer, waiting, almost holding her breath. But then, the girl nods, just once, a small but powerful acknowledgement of the apology. It's not forgiveness, not yet, but it's a beginning. Behind them, a passenger, one who had been watching the interaction unfold, speaks up. His voice is firm, yet kind, as he turns to the flight attendant. You should leave the girl alone, he says, his words steady and resolute. No one should be treated like that, no matter who they are or where they're from. The words resonate in the air, and the flight attendant, though embarrassed, can't help but feel a small flicker of something relief, maybe. Or perhaps it's a dawning realization that there are others who recognize injustice when they see it, who are willing to stand up for what's right. The passengers' eyes meet briefly, the silent understanding passing between them. The flight attendant takes a step back, her head slightly bowed, her heart heavy with regret. There's nothing she can say to undo the harm she has caused. But there is, at least, a moment of acknowledgement, a small gesture of accountability. As the plane continues its journey, the atmosphere shifts again, this time toward a quiet sense of resolution. The girl remains calm in her seat, though the tension in her shoulders has eased. The flight attendant, too, seems quieter now, more reflective, as though she started down a path she hadn't expected to walk. And as the final moments of the flight unfold, the narrator steps in, urging the audience to reflect on what they've witnessed. In this world, it's all too easy to let prejudice go unchecked, to allow assumptions to dictate how we treat one another. But what we've seen here, today, is a reminder of the harm that those biases can cause not just to the people we target, but to ourselves as well. We are all human, all capable of growth, of change. And sometimes it takes a moment, just one single moment of reflection, of recognizing the truth we've long avoided, to realize the damage we've done, and to take the first step toward healing. We all carry biases, whether we want to admit it or not. The important thing isn't that we acknowledge our flaws, it's that we do something about them. We must challenge our own assumptions, even when it feels uncomfortable. We must learn to see one another as equals, as people deserving of respect and dignity, regardless of our differences. The young girl's calm resilience, the passenger's quiet words of support, the flight attendant's difficult but necessary journey towards self-awareness, these are the steps that lead to understanding, to empathy. They are the threads that bind us all together, reminding us that it's never too late to change, to be better. So, take a moment wherever you are to reflect on your own actions, your own biases. Ask yourself how you can contribute to making the world a kinder, more just place. Because, in the end, it is empathy, not prejudice, that will lead us to a better tomorrow. The final words linger in the air, the message clear and powerful, as the plane continues its journey toward its final destination. The audience is left with the understanding that it's up to each of us to challenge our own assumptions and to stand up against injustice, wherever it may appear. As we bring this story to a close, I want you to take a moment and think about the moments in your own life. Have you ever witnessed or experienced something similar when biases were at play, whether subtle or overt? How did it make you feel? Did you stand up or did you stay silent? It's not always easy to challenge the things we've been taught or to speak out when we see injustice, but every choice we make can either reinforce or challenge the world around us. What would you have done if you were in the shoes of the flight attendant or the passengers who spoke up? We want to hear from you. Drop a comment below and share your thoughts. Let's talk about how we can create change, one step at a time. If you found this video thought-provoking, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for more content that dives into the challenges we face and how we can grow together. Your voice matters, and we want to keep this conversation going. Thanks for watching, and remember, empathy and understanding are the first steps toward making the world a better place for everyone.